Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Did you know you can advertise on podcasts?
Don't act like you're not impressed.
Find out more at podvertise.com.au. That's podvertise with an s.com.au.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome to Word Docs. I'm here this week, as usual, with my favourite writers. I'm Dr. Amy Matthews, and I'm here with Dr. Alex Vickery-Howe.
Hi.
Still sonorous. And Dr. Sean Williams.
Hi, I can't compete with Alex's sonorous voice.
Oh, you've got a natural radio voice. You're fine. Alex is working it.
You've got that Tom Gleisner voice, Sean.
Does.
And people keep saying it. I was watching Tom on TV the other day, and there was a moment where I looked up from my work and thought, is that Sean? I'm serious.
Sean Gleisner. He could actually be on Radio National, I think, Sean.
Really?
Yeah, you've got that voice.
Maybe that could be on my tombstone, often mistaken for Tom Gleisner. But not in the near future, I think.
Yeah, he wishes.
The other way round, Sean. His tombstone will say, often mistaken for New York Times bestseller, Sean Williams.
Well, you guys are too nice to me, but thank you.
We're not most of the time.
You are my favourite authors too. Let's spread the love a little bit further.
All right, so today these loving, spreading authors.
Now it's gone to that dark place again, Amy.
I had to take it there. Come on, we're getting a bit too sappy. Can't do romance too sappy, or it's a hallmark.
No, let's just do hardcore porn instead.
That's what you do, Mr. Decameron. All right, today we're talking about research. I've decided we're going to...
That just came out of nowhere. Today we're talking about research.
Because otherwise this is going to go on forever.
Cutting to the chase.
Okay, today we're going to talk very seriously about being PhD people.
We are, about being Word docs. So, in fact, Sean and I have been quite hung up on this year because we've been on non-traditional research output committees, and I've been dealing with PhD students submitting all year. Sean's just taken on a new PhD student. We've been doing a lot of talking and thinking about what it means to be a creative researcher, what it means to produce creative artifacts, and also more traditional research, because all of us are hybrid, and really what our research is and what the context of it is. So we thought we'd devote a whole episode into talking about research and the various kinds. It can be like the hardcore scholarly research, and it can also be which rabbit warrens we're going down to research our novels. So I don't know who would like to go first.
Who wants to go on the rack first today?
I think it should be Sean, because Alex did it last time. No.
Because Sean knows that I played the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. I was in 2 productions of Alice in Wonderland. The first was when I was 7 and I was a daisy. I was cast as a daisy and I had to wear a leotard and tights, and I actually cried at the stockings place when I had to try on stockings, as you would as a 7-year-old boy. I mean, crying...
Were they too tight?
Crying... Just the thought of it. I mean, I didn't think it was very masculine, but then, of course, crying didn't really do anything to rectify that. So I played a daisy and in the end quite enjoyed it. But if you watch the video, I'm miming all of the other roles. It's really embarrassing. I don't know why I was doing it.
Oh, you needed to be the star. You needed to do all the roles.
I needed to draw attention to myself. But then when I was much older, I played the White Rabbit. I graduated from Daisy to White Rabbit. All of this is just a massive segue into research.
Can I just ask you, Alex, are you a method actor? Like, did you, for the Daisy role, did you stand in the field?
I sat in a garden for 6 hours, Sean. No, I didn't.
You practiced unfurling.
No, I'm like Rex Harrison. My old drama teacher, Joan Leslie, worked with all these, she worked with Harry Seacombe and Benny Hill and Eartha Kitt, Shirley Bassey and all these wonderful people. And she said Shirley Bassey was amazing because in a rehearsal, Shirley Bassey was really dressed down and wasn't very interesting at all. And then suddenly at night would come out as Shirley Bassey, as this amazing superhuman creature. But she talked about Rex Harrison and said Rex Harrison would talk about anything else right up until the point at which he walked on stage. Like literally would just be there having a cup of tea, talking about other things. So that's the sort of actor I was, and that probably explains why I'm now a writer.
Why you can't roll a cigarette.
We keep alluding to that. I don't know if I've ever explained on air what the rolling of the cigarette was.
I think you did. I think it was in an early episode.
When I had to play a masculine soldier. The masculinity, as you can see, is a reoccurring theme. So So in terms of research, segueing on, I have discovered this year that I quite enjoy writing abstracts and talking to journal editors about journals I'd like to write. I don't particularly like doing them, but I quite like the talking about doing them.
So what kind of things do your journal articles focus on?
So I tend to, this is so deeply narcissistic, but I tend to write a creative work and then team up with another researcher to talk about, in a traditional research sense, talk about where that work is positioned in relation to others and what the inspirations were. So, for example, one of the articles I'm doing is a comparative study on Watchlist, the play I wrote with Stephen Sewell's Myth, Propaganda and Disaster in Nazi Germany and Contemporary America, best play title ever, and Susie Miller's play, I don't even know how to say this, prima facie or prima facie.
Mm-hmm. We're staying silent because we don't want to get it wrong.
I think it's Latin, right?
Prima facie, I think is how it's. I don't know.
I don't think anyone really knows, because you see Susie Miller says it one way, the library says it another way. So I'm doing I've drafted an article which is a comparative study on those 3 Australian plays. So, a third of it is my own work, which is the narcissistic part, and then the other 2/3 are other writers. But I'm working with Lisa Harper Campbell, who's another Word doc, and you divide the labour, and I've done this before with other researchers, you divide it so that I tend to write about other people's work, and then the researcher I'm working with might ask me questions about my work, which makes it slightly less narcissistic and strange. But what's interesting about that process is that sometimes another researcher will hit on something that you didn't know you were doing. So I did an article a couple of years ago with Dr. Maggie Ivanova on a play I wrote called Out of the Ordinary, which is kind of a funny sort of, it's a school show really, it's done a couple of schools. And Maggie then looked at other plays I'd written and she looked at about 3 or 4 different things and identified the same patterns and said, oh, you're always interested in these 2 or 3 things. One of the ones that she came out with, which I keep referencing, is the existential split. She says, everything you've ever written deals with an existential split. And I said, well, what's an existential split, Dr. Ivanova? And she says, everything is about someone being pulled 2 different ways or being split in 2 in some way. And that is sometimes literally, like I've done plays where different actors play the same character across different time periods, or I've done plays where, well, if you look at Out of the Ordinary, the main character is split in 2, and we eventually realise that the other self she's talking to is her unborn baby. And they're having this kind of dialogue. So there's a kind of weird duality going on. Or the play I'm writing now, Angel Dust, is about a model graduate who becomes this kind of larger-than-life character. It's that kind of like Norma Jean becoming Marilyn Monroe, or Reggie Dwight becoming Elton John, or David Jones becoming David Bowie. That split between the real person and the fantasy person. So
don't forget Gary Webb and Gary Newman. I know you were about to mention Gary Webb and Gary Newman, but I just wanted to make sure.
The other one I was thinking of was Lady Gaga, but I can't remember her real name. It's Stephanie something.
Gaga, I think. Stephanie Gaga.
Gaga was my nickname for my grandmother. That's the real Lady Gaga in my mind. So anyway, so sometimes that kind of research collaboration helps you to situate your own work, but it also is really interesting because it reflects, you reflect on your own work and you realise kind of psychologically what you're doing. So I found that interesting, but I'm also quite interested, I'm not always narcissistic, I'm also interested in researching other things that have nothing to do with me.
Like what other people think about you. Yeah, that old one.
The criticism of Alex Vickery Howe. No, I'm doing another article on Dark, the TV show, and Russian Doll, a comparative study on those structurally. And I might be doing one on the Decameron, where again I would focus on what the other writers did in the Decameron, not so much on me. So I kind of like to, I guess, situate what I'm doing. I'm interested in storytelling that breaks traditional structures with time or other worlds, so Dark and Russian Doll.
So what kind of journals do you publish in? Just because if we have students listening to this.
Mainly ADSA, which is Australasian Drama Studies, the Drama Review. The one I'm publishing at the moment. I'm going to forget their name. It's Theatre and Drama Studies or something like that.
Well, that's it. They're not publishing you now.
No, I think I might have got that wrong. I was also working with Dr. Virginia Kinnear on a article around metaphor in fantasy fiction, which we're going to publish in an education journal, but we haven't. We keep meaning to do that. We keep getting really busy.
Yeah, it's hard to fit it all in.
It's really hard to fit it all in. But so I guess I don't mind doing some of that traditional stuff. I don't think it's strictly necessary, but sometimes it's fun to play with that other side of your brain. And also you learn a bit about different structures, different processes, what other people are doing, how that might inform your work, and so on. Yeah, so that's I've had a fairly good year in terms of presenting abstracts and talking to journal editors. I just haven't finished any of these yet. But I love sending the emails and talking about what I'm going to do. That's lots of fun.
You talk a good paper.
He does.
I'm very good at that. It's the actual finishing stuff that, you know, I mean, we're going to have a lot of hot chocolates before we finish anything, Sean.
Oh, yeah. That sounds great to me. I'm in a similar kind of boat. I have ideas for papers, but because I'm new to all this, I don't know who to send them to, and I really must read some to see what kind of things, what they look like. And I mean, I could write papers for years about my obsession with twins or matter transmitters or the matter transmitter itself, but it needs to be positioned against other work and in ways that are relatively new to me. I have been talking about writing a short critical book about the matter transmitter and co-writing a book on Porcupine Tree's last album, The Incident, with my friend and colleague, Dr. Kim Wilkins. If we can get a 33 1/3 book out, I could probably retire with happiness. But we've been talking about it for 2 years and we keep missing the friggin' deadline. We missed it by a week last month. Normally I get obsessive and I check every week, is it open, is it open, is it open? COVID happened, I got busy, went away to do some research, came back and missed the entire opening period. So next year.
Awesome.
It was fascinating listening to you, Alex, about what you're talking about. I know you and I have talked about co-writing something as well with our colleague, Dr. Sarah Peters. That would be really interesting to be involved in and learn how to do these things. But Amy, you're a powerhouse for academic writing.
I'm not feeling it so much this year. I have years where I'm really productive. This year's been novel year. And I did that consciously. I hit this period where I was so busy that I was like, this year's just getting back to basics and setting up some new projects. But I've got some articles I have to finish, which I am co-writing with people. I usually write alone. I'm much more comfortable as a solo warrior. But I have written with PhD students before, and I have 2 different streams. Well, really it's become 3 different streams. I can't seem to stay in one topic. So I've got, my PhD was on the ethics of fictionalizing the Holocaust, and I still write some stuff in that area and trauma history. And then I've been moving into writing about romance and popular romance studies. So as part of that, in the last few years, I've been working in the area of colonial historical fiction, and that got me thinking about, obviously there's enormous problems representing colonies, but you kind of have to, like if you're writing historical fiction, which I do, you've got this tension between modern sensibilities and your modern politics, your contemporary politics, and then the way things actually used to be. So there's things like recovering lost stories is a way of marrying up those 2 things, but also challenging the accepted histories, that there are all of these ways we've thought about history that aren't necessarily reflective of how they were. So I think I've said on the show before, 40% of all cowboys in the West were actually African American. And then also, it was a very diverse place. I'm researching for a current series, the Elkhorn Mountains in Montana in the 1880s, and there were a lot of silver mines and copper mines up in that area, and they were unlike the gold mines in California. These were mining towns that were built of immigrant families. And I was kind of so surprised to see the diversity. So in one town, you would have Greeks, you would have Turkish people, you would have people from all over Europe, Russia, Eastern Europe. You'd have all different kinds of religions, and they brought their families. So they were this incredible melting pot in the 1880s in an area you would think of as kind of white and Protestant. And so really kind of kicking back against some of the myths about what settlement looked like. But in doing that, because I've been writing in the West, I have been talking to Australian publishers about, I had one publisher ask me, would I do that but set it in Australia, like do Australian fiction? And I just kind of found myself reacting kind of with horror of like, I don't know how to do that kind of light comedy in the Australian frontier, because I guess I feel so culpable. Like I look at my family and that they took land away, and like, how do I deal with my own shame and guilt? And so I've been working on that in the background.
It's a different relationship. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So all of this thinking goes into, I'm going to segue here actually to talk about what we do, because I think there's some misunderstanding about what we actually do.
Yes.
And people often will talk about, as someone said to me last week, in terms of a PhD, it's not about new art, it's about new knowledge. And I thought that's kind of splitting hairs, because if you're one of us, all the art is coming out of this quest for knowledge and research questions. And Kate Grenville says that every novel is driven by a question, or you would find that with a play. Like the amount of research and thinking that we're doing in reflection, maybe it's not true for every novelist, but the kinds of novelists who exist within universities, this is absolutely how we go about it, driven by research questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my friend Caleb is the king of this. I suspect, this might be talking out of school, Caleb, if you're listening, I suspect that one of the things he enjoys most is the research phase of his work.
Yeah.
And so when he did a play called The Honeybees, he went and became a bee guy. What are they called? Is it apiarist?
I think so.
He became a bee guy and really went there. And,
did he come and fertilise your daisy, Alex? Sorry, Caleb.
Dressed as a bee. No, so and there are lots of examples of that. You know, he did another play called Clinchfield about the time they hanged. Sorry, the expression is hanged an elephant. They actually hanged an elephant for murder, and he was obsessed with it. You know, and I think he preferred. I'm sure he enjoyed writing and doing the play, but I was around him when he was researching it, and he was just obsessed with it.
Yeah,
and about, you know, what that means, you know, in terms of, you know, real lynchings that were going on at the same time. So there's a parallel there. What it means in terms of the question of morality and culpability and, you know, can an elephant be put on trial? You know, it was just this whole... The other one, he did a Gene Pitney tribute play, and he became obsessed with tribute acts and went to, you know, music festivals. So I think some people really do go down the research rabbit hole, and I think that's a big part of what we do. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the whole thing about generating new knowledge, the art contains the new knowledge. It's not like you have to write. I mean, we all do write the exegetical essays or the journal articles, and I think people aren't always aware of that. So we write research statements that go with the creative work, but you know, all of my work, it doesn't matter which genre, is embedded with the new knowledge, and so I think that's something hopefully this podcast helps with too, is thinking about how, when you're thinking about art in the academy, that it is always about the looking into research questions and new knowledge. So with one thing I'm very fascinated by is embedded sexism and genre, and really looking at why certain things were dismissed. So with End of the Night Girl, I was really interested in the chicklet voice. And how it is often dismissed as kind of lightweight, and so it with that book you have the chicklet voice trying to contain one of the heaviest literary topics, which is Holocaust fiction, and how far can you stretch it? And you know, a lot of the criticism would talk about, and by criticism I just mean reviews, not bad criticism, would talk about how interesting the juxtaposition of the two voices was, and how uncomfortable they felt with the chicklet voice standing up against that literary voice because they intersected them.
Yeah, I was talking about that with a friend the other night. Someone said, what has Amy written? I said, well, I'll give you a rundown of End of the Night Girl. And they were absolutely taken with the idea of that juxtaposition and going, oh, wow, how would you even do that? I said, well, you know, borrow the book. buy the book.
Yeah. And then with romance, thinking about, okay, well, so you want to deliver something that is escapist, that is pacey, that has enough complexity to deliver a proper emotional experience so people buy in and laugh and cry and whatever. But also you're dealing with things like patriarchal societies which are unreconstructed, right? So whether it's the medieval era or the Viking era or I write in the West, you have to have female characters who are dealing with these incredibly repressive situations, but also colonies. So that's what I've been really interested in for the last 4 books. I'm about to write 2 more, And each book deals with a different aspect of it. It might deal with being a single woman responsible for children, all alone, you can't own property, there's all these kinds of constraints against you. But then I also had one about a sex worker. Like, I was talking to my students about it because we did a couple of weeks on the Western. And we're talking about in the traditional Westerns, women are only there to kind of prove that the hero is heterosexual.
Yeah.
Because in Westerns, it's so much about, it's like a buddy flick, right? It's about the two guys. And one of my students was fascinating because she's from a station, and she was talking about, there's a reason behind that, is that you never want to be alone out in the wild, right? Because if you break a leg or get bitten by a snake, you need someone there. So in frontier societies, men always traveled at least in pairs so they could look after each other. So that's kind of the origin of the buddy story in the West too. But then they always had to throw in a whore or, you know, like Grace Kelly in High Noon, like the Puritan girl who's the good wife, to just prove he's not gay. And so then I was saying to them, you know, the whore pops up all the time. And in 50s films, it's in this nice sanitized way as a dancing girl, or like Angela Lansbury or something, but it's still a prostitute, right? So I was like, well, what would it be like to be the prostitute? And in Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry has Lorena, but it's not, you know, it's a man writing her. And so I was like, well, what is that like? What is that like that is your only thing to trade is yourself? And, you know, there are studies about sex work, about, you know, the PTSD in sex workers is actually higher than returned Vietnam vets. So really thinking about how far you can stretch romance too. Like, are people going to buy into a sex worker? How do you bring all that complexity to something that is considered light and fluffy?
Yes.
And then the last book I did, the hero was actually in Arapaho, and it's dealing with the Horse Creek Treaty and the effects of the West. And so then I've got to write all that up. So so the novels are out, and the new knowledge is embedded in all those novels.
Yeah.
But now I have to write the reflective kind of exegetical articles about it. So I'm working on that. And then I'm thinking about the Auhistorical, about how to write Australian colonial, that kind of pacey commercial fiction, dealing with everything I'm feeling about being a white Australian coloniser and the fact that I'm still existing within a white supremacy where I'm benefiting from it.
Still benefiting. That's the crucial thing. I wrote a monologue in the Decameron precisely about that. Still benefiting. Benefiting.
Yeah.
I think that's key.
And then I would be benefiting again to write something that sells and you're making money off this trauma history. So then would you working out how you could spend that money to... So that's what I've been thinking about and working on. And then as part of that, thinking about, okay, what are my responsibilities? So I haven't written the Australian Historical. Instead, what I did was I working with Joe Mackay, the head publisher at HarperCollins, who run the commercial imprints like Mira, Harlequin. There's another one I'm forgetting off the top of my head. I'll remember it later. But I talked to her at Writers' Week one week, and we decided to put together the First Nations Commercial Fiction Fellowship. So Flinders and HarperCollins has been running that. And the idea of that was, instead of me writing a book, let's try and give a voice to own voices authors. And then the question was, well, how many Indigenous authors are out there who want to write romance or commercial fiction? No idea. So we established the First Nations Commercial Fiction Fellowship, and Angie Martin won it. So I've been working with her all year on her novel. She's written this incredible crime book set in the outback about missing Indigenous girls. And I don't know if there are several active crimes like this in Australia at the moment where the police just have not bothered to look into missing Indigenous girls. And so she's got this incredible kind of procedural. The police officer is an Aboriginal woman and researching these missing Aboriginal. It's an amazing crime novel. So I'm just working on the latest draft of that with her now, and then it will go back to HarperCollins, and fingers crossed it gets published and it gets out there in the world.
Brilliant.
So that was kind of what I came to, was like, maybe the world doesn't need me to write an Australian commercial fiction about this stuff. Maybe I need to find a way to boost and support authors of colour to tell their own stories. So then I'll have to write some reflective. So I've got years of reflective articles to write on this stuff.
Oh,
to
absolutely.
translate all the research I've been doing into that. It's just, you know, there's only one of me, and I'm not sure how to do it all.
Cloning, Amy, cloning.
I do have 2 research assistants at the moment who are busily working on draft articles as part of that fellowship, and hopefully they'll be out next year.
It's interesting, that trope you raise about the prostitute, the dancing girl being there just to stop the buddies from seeing like a couple, because obligatory Star Wars reference, I think that's what happens in The Rise of Skywalker as well. We just have these like female love interest characters introduced really late in the game, just to tell us, oh, Poe and Finn probably won't hook up because he knows this woman who looks like Daft Punk, and Finn's met this other woman, near the Death Star.
That was so random, all of that.
Yeah. But it really does feel like that. Oh, we better throw some women in just to kill the spark that all the fans are talking about, which is interesting. And
annoying.
And that's just one contemporary example, but I'm sure there's many, many, many more.
My favourite one is the Starsky and Hutch movie, where it's obviously a gay romance, and obviously some producer said, oh, we need a woman in there, a romantic interest, and the stars went, well, let's have a hot tub scene with like 10 women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to make it ridiculously overcompensated.
Same with Wedding Crashers. That's clearly a couple too.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so what I've been interested in is how you restore those women as the protagonists.
Yes.
I think that's a very interesting angle. As we're all talking about this, another person that we teach, a writer that we bring to drama in first year, who is fantastic, is Benjamin Law, who did, of course, The Family Law. And it's a TV show. It's a book and a TV show. But the reason it's on the curriculum is that sometimes students, it's interesting for us because we're trapped between the research expectations of the university and the kind of teaching expectations. And sometimes the university doesn't quite see that the creative work is research. That's an ongoing space. But often also the students don't see the value of that link either. But Benjamin Law's a really good one because I can go, here's his PhD, right? Here's his PhD where he reflects on these issues. Here's what it turned into. This, really funny, really warm sitcom that went for, I think, 3 seasons. And that's a big moment for the first years. They actually go, okay, so that research brain can lead to something that we find really fun. And it's something I put into first year to say, look, this is how a research brain and a creative brain can be one and the same.
Yeah.
And it's important to me because I sometimes find it irritating when people try and divide these things.
Me too.
I find it's like, well, if you're creative, of course you're a researcher. You have to be.
The other thing I always think is that when we're talking to traditional scholars is we're all the same. You're writing too. You're a writer as well. It's just a slightly different genre. We're all just writing in different genres, but it's still the same thing. You're still having ideas, sitting down and putting them on the page in words. We're all doing the exact same thing, really, at that level.
Yeah.
Like the kind of research we're doing is different, but I do find the division really artificial. And the other thing I know we've all talked about this, one of the things that was very important to me was I wanted to talk to people outside of the academy. I wanted to take all these ideas and write for regular women who are, out in the world living their lives, picking up a book at Walmart or on their Kindle, or not just people who wanted to look up journals.
For sure.
And people who are not necessarily educated through universities.
This is something you see a lot in the genre that I write for, science fiction, the so-called literature of ideas. When that slogan you quoted before, that the new knowledge idea that we butt up against sometimes in terms of creative research, I think new understandings is what I strive for in my science fiction writing, or in all writing really, but particularly science fiction, that the research that I do during, before or after writing the book is all about putting some kind of new understanding into the text. So if there's no new knowledge or new understanding in the text, then it isn't a creative work from my perspective. And all the research I do is in service of creating that new understanding, whether it's about privacy or identity or humanity, as a lot of science fiction is, or climate change, or...
Yeah. And we are in such a period where science fiction is so important too, I think.
Yeah, or speculative fiction. I was having a conversation with some of my genre friends last night about how we felt about literature embracing the term speculative fiction when the term science fiction already exists and has a long history to it, and whether speculative fiction erases the long tradition of science fiction.
Oh, yeah. It's the way they have to keep changing the names so people don't look down, right? Women's fiction, not chick lit, or they just rebrand it so people don't look down on us.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I think it's a fascinating process. I'm actually struggling to think of ways to write critical papers on topics because I feel like I've already said everything I need to say inside the text, but I'll find a way.
That is a really interesting thing too, isn't it? And then also you don't want to pin down, there's spaces that open up in literature that you don't necessarily want to fill in with your articles.
That's a good point.
Now, I think we've run out of time. We could talk about this a lot. This is one of our pet loves, I think, talking about splitting that hair between new art and new knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why it irks us, I think, when people say, is it really research? Is it really count as research? We know that it's full of great knowledge and a lot of work. So when somebody says, it doesn't count, it really rankles.
And there's actually an audience, there's that too.
I kind of want to say, well, who cares if, your close reading of Tolkien has demonstrated that they use the word 40% more time. What use is that knowledge? But of course, all knowledge is good and all research is good. But
I'm going to write that paper now.
That is peak Sean. I love Sean so much because you can manage to give an insult and then be so nice afterwards. Like, that's okay. Have some chocolate.
Have some chocolate. It'll be fine. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting space. And I think the last thought from me is that a lot of what we're touching on is the popular and the idea that the popular can't be research or the popular can't be worthy.
Or intelligent.
Which I have never understood. I've never understood the high art, low art dichotomy. I rebelled against it as an undergrad. I had a go at my then screen studies lecturer and said, "No, you're sharing bullshit with us."
No. That's your whole essay. No.
He was saying The Lion King, dare I bring it up? He was saying The Lion King is low art. I said, why? Best composers, best voiceover artists, best visual artists,
Did he say, well, it's obviously a rip-off of Kimber the White Lion?
No, don't bring up Kimber the White Lion.
I will always say that. Every time you bring it up, Alex, I will always defend Kimber the White Lion.
No, it's a valid point. But, the idea that the popular is unworthy is something that will never, ever compute with me. I'll never understand that. And I'll probably never respect that, to be honest.
I think there's a big whack of classism and sexism and all kinds of things.
Yes.
All the isms.
And it's a lack of research showing there too, because science fiction is about as popular as literary fiction. So if it's purely on popularity, they should be held in equal esteem. So, I don't know, double standards everywhere you look, and tribalism.
Yeah. Bastards. We'll stay in our tribe. Join our tribe. All right, we're going to wrap up there. That all got a bit out of control.
Before we start naming names.
Thank you for joining us this week. We'll be back again next week, as usual, hopefully, with more stimulating discussions. Hey, Alex?
Yes. You keep using the word stimulating, and it's
disturbing you.
It's disturbing me.
Nah.
All
right. We'll see you next week. Happy writing.
Happy researching.
Oh. See what he did there?
Happy researching.
Oh, yeah, I've been planning that all episode.
See ya.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them start with "I love you, honey," but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that "please remit." Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
This is Sean's clap. I'm going to try and do a good one this time.
That was a good one.
My last one was terrible.
Well
you
done,
sounded
Sean.
despondent, though. But
I can't look at you. Okay, when you're ready.
I've just got to wait till he stops laughing and then I'll go. Go on, look, Alex. Look at the screen. It totally helps.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, well,
It's like one of those nature videos where they like have the camera set up and the meerkat's right there.
There was a great one online of a monkey that just took a bunch of selfies on this guy's camera, and they are really good.
So Sean's the selfie monkey.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.